Hello, everyone, and thank you for participating in one of our sessions. My name is Michael Malik. I run marketing activities at Argos Translations. We're a leading European language services provider with headquarters in the beautiful city of Krakow. Today, we'll be showing you a presentation on terminology management's do's and don'ts. It's delivered by Veronika Solarek. We're also joined by two of our experts, Nadej Young and Wojtek Frolich, who will answer your questions during the Q&A section. I'll be turning everyone's microphones off during the webinar to prevent feedback, but I'd like to ask you to freely use the chat box to submit your questions throughout the presentation. We'll answer them at the end of the webinar. Also, as a quick survey, while we start moving ahead, can I ask you all to text me privately with what you are expecting to learn from today's session? We'll try to adjust it as much as possible with the most frequent responses. In the meantime, I'll now be handing the microphone over to Veronika, and I hope you'll enjoy.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining the presentation. My name is Veronika Solarek, and I'm the head of the linguistic department in Argos Translations. So what you will learn during today's presentation. First of all, we will try to answer the question why you need a glossary and how to create it. Then we will talk how to use the glossary and what are the most frequent mistakes that should be avoided when creating a glossary. And then last but not least, we will talk how to keep the glossary up to date, when it should be updated, and who should be looking after this process. To start with, we will go through the glossary creation process. It will be our main point of reference during the presentation. So we will start with the decision on the glossary type and structure. Then we will go to terminology mining, that is done using automatic terminology extraction tools. Then we will pass to the selection of candidate terms and the client approval, which is a recommended step. Then we will talk a bit about translation and revision by subject matter experts, so-called SMEs, and also the client approval, and we will explain why this approval is needed at this step. Then we will pass to the usage across project. So in other words, what can you do with your glossary once it's translated? And finally, we'll go to the last step, so updating the glossary once the project is over. So first of all, we need to answer the question, what we can achieve through correct terminology management. First of all, we can ensure the use of correct client or subject matter expert approved terminology. First of all, it allows us to save costs of translation updates at a later stage of a project if it turns out that one of key terms was translated incorrectly, or even if not incorrectly, then not following client's preferences, and then implementing huge amounts of changes at a late stage of a project, it can be extremely time-consuming and very costly. So a good thing to do at the very beginning of the project is to first of all create a glossary and then invest time and money in translating and approving it by subject matter experts. And honestly speaking, it's better to have a small glossary, but a glossary that is really reliable and can be used as a main terminology reference by all parties involved in the project, rather than having a huge glossary that actually is not reliable and may be a source of further inconsistencies in the project. Then we will another thing that can be achieved through the correct terminology management is terminology consistency across various versions or products within the product line. So in other words, if a user of version 1 of a product gets version 2 or 3 and finds that a different terminology is used, or what's even worse, software options that have the same functionality are called differently, well, it can be a problem for for such a user, right? And the last thing here is terminology consistency between various elements of the same product. So in other words, consistency between the software and documentation, or between marketing materials and what can be found on the internet website or an online shop. As you can imagine, all the products should be referenced in the same way, or product names, or various services that are offered, in order to avoid confusion on the side of the potential customer. So the first step here, when we decide that we want to have a glossary, is what the glossary we want to have and what should be the structure of this glossary. So there are several factors that influence the structure of a glossary. And first of all, it's the type of the content that we are dealing with. There are several types of contents listed here, and the list is not exhaustive, as you probably know. But it should be enough for the sake of this presentation, because it lists the main types of the content. So if you have a product documentation or help for software, or if you have a technical manuals, or if you're dealing with medical product documentation, then you probably know that the use of exact and correct terminology is extremely important, and the use of incorrect terms may have really severe consequences. And now, in those types of texts, it's usually very easy to extract large amounts of terminology. And the only restriction here is actually the budget that you have. We may not forget that translating a glossary is a very time-consuming task, especially if the glossary is a very specialized one. It doesn't contain any general terms. So it's something that we should also keep in mind and when planning our glossary. So when we have product documentation, marketing, technical manuals, medical documentation, having a glossary is extremely useful, and actually the more detailed it is, the better for the user. On the other hand, when we are dealing with marketing documents, such as here, as you can see, Snow Up Your Life, you can imagine that translating this type of text with reference to a very detailed glossary would actually ruin the stylistic side of this text. It's definitely not something that that potential customer would like to see. However, even for this type of text, it's very good to have a glossary. But in this case, I would suggest creating a glossary of, for example, accommodation terminology. So it's something that the potential client might want to compare between various offers, various deals, and the terminology should make it easy for him to do it. Okay, another factor that has an impact on the structure of a glossary is a glossary type. I've already mentioned two types here. So a general terminology, so just the key terms. It is useful in case of marketing texts or more general projects. For the more technical projects, those of very complex content, medical documents, if it's only possible, if you have enough budget, it's good to have an extensive terminology list. However, there are also two other options not mentioned before. And the first of them is the glossary of untranslatables or product names. So in other words, those elements that should be untranslated across all languages. And having such a glossary is very, very useful. And another glossary type here is the software dump. So in other words, it's a list of software options already translated that can be used as a reference when translating a documentation file, in order to make sure that the menu names are referred to correctly in the documentation. And last but not least, so metadata. In other words, what other information other than the self-source and the target terms do you want to have in your glossary? And here you have an example of a really, I would say, rich glossary. So you have here product, vertical, term status, whether it has been approved or is pending approval, subdomain, domain, term type, comments field, very, very useful, context, also very useful. But of course, you don't have to include all this information in your glossary. You just need to, at the time of planning your glossary, you just need to sit and think and decide what information you will really need. Okay, then the next step, once you know how your glossary should look like, is terminology mining, so simply extracting terminology from the files. We usually do it automatically. Actually, we always do it automatically, simply because it saves time and it's the most efficient way to do it. At the moment, there are two general. We can divide the tools, extraction tools, into two general group, depending on the approach. So there are two types of approach. One is linguistic, and the other one is statistical. The linguistic approach, it looks for combinations that match a specific pattern. For example, adjective and a noun. As you can imagine, this approach is language dependent because the patterns may differ from language to language. So unfortunately, those tools, even though they are really effective, unfortunately, they need to be adjusted to particular language. So you may have a tool that works perfectly for English, but it won't give really good results for French or Polish. On the other hand, we have statistical tools, and those tools simply look for repeated sequences of lexical items. And they can be used for all languages simply because they aren't language dependent. Okay, and the next step, so selection of candidate terms and the approval of the list of terms to be translated. It's worth mentioning that the selection of candidate terms should always be done by the same person. It's something we really recommend. And here in Argos, we have so-called language leads. They are assigned to particular clients, and it's always the language lead who selects the terms for a glossary. As for the approval that I mentioned before, it's very good to have the list of terms approved before it goes to translation. And ideally, it will be to have it approved by the content authors. Okay, and now, what we should remember about when selecting the glossary entries. So first of all, we need to select those terms that appear frequently within the project. It doesn't make much sense to select a term that appears twice in a 100K project. On the other hand, we shouldn't select those terms that are very obvious, like engine, for example. If we are translating a huge manual on engine maintenance, it will be just a too easy term to include in the glossary, and it's not really worth it unless you have a very, very specific and uncommon translation for the word engine and you absolutely want to be used. On the other hand, it's good to have a product-specific terminology or client-specific terminology included in the glossary, and also those terms that are most difficult for translators. Because on one hand, the glossary should ensure consistency, but it should also be used as a help for translators, especially in case of very difficult projects and very, very complex content. When creating a glossary, it's also good to look for any untranslatables, and we usually find them in almost every project, like product names, any functions or commands that should be left as they are in the source. And having such a glossary is really useful for translators. And it also allows us to automatically check consistency of the product names, for example, at the end of the project. So it's really useful. And what are the frequent mistakes that should be avoided when selecting those candidate terms? First of all, we shouldn't use those obvious terms, especially as they can be translated differently depending on the context. And here we have an example of the word valve that can be translated into French as soupape. And the translation is absolutely correct. You can find it in every dictionary. However, if you have a technical project, technical text, it's about a hydraulic system, let's say. And in this text, you can find the word valve in terms such as control valve, suction control valve, and drain valve. And now, if you look at the translations, French translations listed here, you can see that the word soupape is used only in the first term. In the second term, we have vin distillation, and in the third one, we have purgeur. And now, imagine that we have added this word, so valve, and the translation soupape, into our glossary. First of all, it will be really confusing for the translators because they will see that when translating drain valve, they should use the word soupape. So it may actually cause some problems in the translation. And at the end of the project, even if all translations are done correctly, if we want to use an automatic, if we want to run an automatic consistency check with the glossary, we will get a lot of notifications about possible errors. These are so-called false positives. I will show you an example on one of the future slides. And in case of larger projects, the number of such false positives can be really, really high. And such a report in such situations is no longer really useful for the translators. Another thing to remember about is not to use articles in the source target languages in our glossary. Actually, don't use it at the beginning of your terms. So as you can see above in our examples, use soupape de commande for translation instead of la soupape de commande. Okay? Simply because in some languages, the articles can be contracted, and instead of la, we would have de la, or then simply be omitted in some cases. And this would also cause false positives. Another thing is avoiding using complex terms, so terms that have 5 words or more, simply because the risk of having them used inconsistently in the source text is very high. So the longer the term, the more possible it is that it won't be used consistently. And when the source is inconsistent, the automatic consistency check isn't really useful. And the last thing here is, sorry, not the last, but it's to avoid using verbs and adjectives unless those verbs and adjectives are really client or product specific. So for example, in your technical manual, you want to have the word, the verb remove, always translated as déposer into French. And you don't really accept any other translations. And in such case, it's really good to have this verb added to your glossary. However, in other cases, if you don't really care what the translation for the verb remove will be, you just want to have the meaning transferred into the target language, then there's no really point in using this verb in your glossary, because all verbs will always generate noise, so the false positives in the report. And the last point this time is capitalization. So use the natural capitalization. If start your terms with a small letter, unless it's a product name, so it should use a capital letter, simply because one day you may want to run an automatic check for the capitalization, and then having it done correctly in the glossary simply saves your time. Okay, the next point is translation and revision by subject matter experts. We really recommend investing in this step. Subject matter expert services can be costly, but they guarantee that you will have correct terminology in your glossary, and that this glossary could be really used as the main terminology reference for the translators. We shouldn't forget that if we don't have a good glossary at the very beginning, it will require some additional updates. And each update that is implemented at a late stage of a project, or once the project is completed, it introduces automatically inconsistencies between the glossary, so the future translations, and what has already been translated, so the legacy material. Okay, and assuming that we have our glossary, and that is translated and approved by subject matter experts, that is approved by the client as well, which is something that we really recommend, we can start using it in our project or projects. And now, the question is what I can do with my glossary once it's ready. So first of all, I can import it into a terminology database so that everyone can use it. And we really recommend a nice solution here, so the online terminology database. We have one in Argos so that you can have a look. I prepared the screenshot here. So in our online terminology, the good thing is that everyone can access it, all translators, project managers, and the client. So this is the end of Excel spreadsheets, of different versions of those Excel spreadsheets that are sent by email, that are posted on FTPs. Now, this is one point when everything is stored. We can have here the concept, and this is various translations. I mean, the translations of a given concept into various languages. We have here French, Czech, and English. And the term details for the French term are displayed here. So we have the translation, we have the status, any additional remarks or comments. We have the context for this term. So like all necessary information and the metadata that we decided that we would like to have here is available. Okay, another thing we can do is to convert the glossary into a format that can be imported by translators working on the files. So, for example, they can import it into multi-term if they are using Trados for translation. And the last thing that we can do with it is to use it for automatic terminology consistency check that can be run using various QA tools that are available on the market. And here I will show you an example of a report that is generated for the glossary consistency check. And this is also a good example that illustrates the problem of using common nouns and not really specialized terminology in your glossary. So as you can see here, we have lots of, the term here is number, that should be translated according to a glossary, should always be translated as nombre into French. But in many cases, in many contexts, it's either used in plural or it can be translated as numéro, and it's absolutely correct translation. And all those issues here, they are so-called false positives. And now, as you can see, the number of rows here is 77 to 87. But I can tell you, because I was checking this project, that the glossary was quite long, and it contained lots of terms such as this one. And actually, the number of the issues reported in this report, in this QA report, it was something around 1,000, maybe slightly less. So it was extremely time-consuming, and like 95% of the issues reported were false positives. And now the question, what's the point, what are the benefits of using such QA tools for automatic consistency check? First of all, we can do it automatically. It doesn't really take much time, and it gives us a guarantee that the translation is consistent with our excellent and approved and SME approved glossary. So we know that the translation is correct, at least from the terminology point of view. And secondly, it is possible to produce a report, to export it from the QA tool. And such a QA report, it lists all possible issues that were found by the QA tool. And such a report can be commented by the translators and delivered to you together with translated files. So it may actually work like a proof that the text, that the project is really consistent with the glossary. As said, using those QA tools for consistency check is a very good idea. However, if we want to do it, we need to remember about two things. First of all, is the consistency of the source text. So simply, if you are the author of the text, you need to remember that those tools work on a very simple basis. They take the source term, and they check if it appears in the source text. If it appears, then it checks whether the translation from the target column has been used. However, if the difference between the source term as it appears in the glossary and the source term as it is used in the source text, if there is a difference between those terms, then the QA tool simply won't pick it. This is why it's very important that the glossary is approved by the client and that it is used by the authors of the content, so that we can really maximize the benefits of using the glossary for automatic checks. And secondly, when working well on the glossary and adjusting it for such use, it's good to include the plural forms as well in our glossary, so that both singular and plural forms are included. Okay, and now the last step, so updating our glossary once the translation is completed. The first and one of the most important here is that it should really be done by one single person. There should be one person appointed for all glossary updates and for authorizing all glossary changes. We recommend that it's the same person who does term extractions, so that everything is under control, that your terminology is consistent, and that the approach to metadata is also the same. Then secondly, everyone involved in the project should be notified about any changes made to the glossary, so that, especially if the changes are done to the glossary while the project is still in production, so that any changes can be immediately reflected in the translation before it's done and delivered. Post-project cleaning is a good moment to update a glossary, simply because it's a time when we go through all feedbacks, we go through the queries that were asked by translators, and based on those feedbacks and questions, we can update the glossary either by changing existing translations or adding new translations. And now, whenever we want to change an existing translation, we need to be aware of one very important thing. By changing the glossary, we introduce inconsistency. And depending on whether it's a key term or a term that has been used only a few times, the scale of the problem may differ, but still we will have inconsistencies. So it is recommended that if you're introducing such changes once the project is completed, that you always update the legacy materials. So, for example, the translation memories, so that you can make sure that there are no inconsistencies between the glossary and the translations that you have. Same for new terms. Whenever you are adding a new term, you should, before you do it, you should check the translation memories in order to make sure that there are no different translations of this term having been already used in the files. And now here's an example of what might happen if you use in your project, if you use a workflow that involves blocking already translated and reviewed segments, but you don't update them whenever you make changes to the terminology. So as you can see, here we have in the cross term. So in a cross term means a glossary. So we have one translation in the glossary, but a completely different in a blocked segment that cannot be edited by translators. And now, if we have this glossary here, glossary entry, and we tell our translators to follow the glossary, we may end up with a translation with two different translations for the same term in one paragraph, for example. And it can be really problematic for the user. Okay, so maybe let's summarize what we just said. So things we should do when creating a glossary. First of all, we should decide on the type and structure of the glossary before we start working on it. We should consider our needs, we should consider our budget, and decide what's the best solution for us. Secondly, when selecting candidate terms, we should always think about the future use of the glossary. So do I want to use it for automatic consistency checks? That's the first thing. Then what other data I want to include for my glossaries? It's also important. Then it's good to have the glossary approved by the subject matter expert and the client or the ordinary party, so that everyone has access to the glossary. All parties involved in the project are using the same glossary, the same terminology, and we can be sure that the client authors, they also have the glossary and they know what source terminology they should use. Ideally, it would be to have the same person doing all terminology extractions, and also ideally it should be the same person who authorizes any changes made to the glossary. Yes, so this is what I've just said. And also, we really recommend that you use QA tools for automatic terminology consistency checks, that you make sure that your vendors, your suppliers use them, because they really improve quality and they can save you money and time in future projects and really improve the quality of the final product. As for the things that we shouldn't do, first of all, please don't use really obvious terms like number in your glossary. Don't use terms that aren't client, product, or industry specific. Don't use verbs or adjectives unless they are really client or product specific and you absolutely want to have them in your glossary for some reason. Also, please do not very long and complex terms unless you're absolutely sure that your content authors will always use them as they are in the glossary. Also, we recommend not to use articles at the beginning of your terms, like, for example, here, instead of le distributeur, just distributeur in the target text. And also, please don't use unnatural capitalization. So, like in the example, all terms starting with capital letter, simply use the capitalization that is used in the text. So usually all terms starting with small letter, unless they are product names or any other type of proper names. And finally, don't introduce terminology changes that are inconsistent with previous translations unless they are absolutely needed. But then really it's good to have the translation memories updated so that all your linguistic materials are consistent and up to date. Okay, everybody, thank you very much for your time, and I'm passing the microphone back to Michael.
Thank you, Veronica, for this extensive and interesting overview of terminology management. We have a few minutes left to answer questions submitted throughout the presentation by our participants. Please feel free to submit more questions as we go through them. You can use the chat box option available on the screen. If we run out of time, we'll post responses to unanswered questions online. Now, let me look at the first ones. The first question that arrived asks, can you explain what is a software dump in a little bit more detail?
Sure. Software dump is another way, in other words, it's a list of software options that was extracted from the software project. This is how it's usually used, because we first usually translate the software and then we translate related documentation. And now when we are translating documentation, the translators somehow need to know how different elements of the user interface, buttons, menus are translated. Because like ensuring consistency between the product and the instructions for use, so in this case software and the documentation, is really crucial for the user, because having instructions that have nothing to do with the software, with the product, it's really it's not really useful, right? It can be extremely confusing. So this is why we use software dump. So the lists, in other words, of the software options in source and target. And they can be used also for automatic consistency checks at the end of translation of the documentation files. They can be used as a reference when translating updates to software. Yes, I hope this answers your question.
Thanks, Veronica. We have one more question. And by the way, I still encourage you to submit more if you have any inquiries. The other question was, what QA tools, I'm assuming quality assurance tools, can we use to extract terminology? Name any.
Yes and no. In other words, we are going to have another presentation, a webinar that will concentrate more on those technical aspects of terminology management. So in other words, extraction tools. And I think that you can learn more during the presentation that will treat those subjects with more detail, more than I can do it here. All I can say about tools that could be of some more interest to you maybe is the QA tools that we used for checking consistency, because I don't think we are going to talk more about it at the next presentation. So the QA tools that we are using are QA Distiller and AppSec Geekbench, and we really expect our vendors to use and deliver reports to us.
Thanks again. Those were the questions. And so now, as we're approaching the end of the webinar, I'd like to invite you all to contact us for more one-on-one presentations or to receive extra information on Argos, our services, and how can we support your terminology management efforts. Also, I hope you'll join us for the upcoming webinars that Veronica mentioned, especially the tools one. You can find more information on them by subscribing to our newsletter. I'll show you the link at the address on the screen that you can see there. We'll also be making a recorded copy of this presentation available, so please email me after the webinar if you'd like to receive a copy of that. For now, thank you again for participating, and I hope to see you all next time.